booktube. This is Kelly and you're watching Books I'm Not Reading. Turns out Books I'm Not Reading actually reads. I had a great last quarter. I read so many more books than I was expecting to. So I just want to briefly do a wrap up of those and then let you know what I'm going to be reading in the next quarter. So we're going to kind of fly through the books I read this past quarter because most of them I have done a video on. The ones I haven't, I will take a moment and tell you a little bit about my experience. But we finished off the Betsy Tacy series with Emily of Deep Valley and Winona's Pony Cart. That was such a great read along. For Victober, I read Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities and Wilkie Collins' The Haunted Hotel. We talked about conversations with friends. And let's see. And then I did kind of a Parisian themed nonfiction November where I read A Year in Paris by John Baxter and Monsieur Mediocre by John von Soffen. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but this is such a funny book. Still really pleased with that one. Of course, I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And now some things I haven't talked about on my channel that I read. Of course, I was able to finish Year of Wonder by Clemence Burton Hill. This is actually a piece of music every day, and then some of her thoughts on the composer, why it's important, why it's a significant piece of music. And in the acknowledgments, it was fascinating. She talked about working with Apple and Google and Spotify to make sure that we could all have access to this music. Because as she points out multiple times in the book, for most of human history, people have not been able to hear this music unless they actually went to a live performance of it. So that is, I guess, a blessing of technology, is that we can now, in the middle of nowhere, can listen to Mozart, and I don't have to go to a concert because I'd be waiting a long time for that. But anyway, I really enjoyed this, and I will say it is more of a time-consuming book because some of the pieces of music are long. Another big triumph is I read Jenny Uglow's biography of Elizabeth Gaskell. Those of you who are Elizabeth Gaskell fans, if you have Christmas money left or money from Hanukkah or whatever the case is, like you really need to read this book. I'm more impressed with Gaskell than ever, although she goes, my one critique about this book is that Jenny Uglow goes through all of Gaskell's books and also many of her stories, and so it's definitely a spoiler alert book, but wow, Elizabeth Gaskell was just an incredible woman, and yeah, it is a fascinating read. I read this with Joe Smith. My only critique of myself on it, too, is that I was desperately trying to finish this before we went to visit family because it's a large book and I did not want to lug it along. So I was just frantically trying to finish it, and that's really not the way to read a biography. So I'm sure there was a lot that I missed in it, which kind of sucks. So, now, some of you remember last year, Plain Song was my favorite book of 2018, and I thought it was a trilogy in conjunction with these two books. So that Plain Song is the first book, and then Eventide, and then some places say Benediction is book number 3 in the Plain Song trilogy. So they do all take place in the same town in Colorado. There is a major gap of time between Eventide and Benediction. So of course I read, because I knew I was going to be reading Benediction, so I felt like I had to read Eventide, and I'm so glad I did. It was wonderful. I mean, it just as amazing as Plain Song. I couldn't believe it. Like, how could a second book, like, it's wonderful. And and really follows a lot of the same characters that are in Plainsong. So characters that I really loved. There is a bigger gap of time, and so there's references to the characters in those other 2 books, but really this is a new set of people and what they're going through. And this book is part of Jason's project called If You Carry a Coffin. It's a mortality project for 2019, and this is the last book. And so Jason and I are going to be discussing it on his channel. And yeah, it is fantastic. All 3 books I would highly, highly recommend. So, and finally, the other 2 books that I read this last quarter are Ali Smith's Autumn and Winter. I find it interesting that these books seem to have like a connection to different Charles Dickens novels. This one seemed to have a connection to A Tale of Two Cities, which ironically I read this quarter. And then Winter, of course, has some correlations with A Christmas Carol. So this one, I felt like Autumn's writing was really strong in the first half. And in the second half, I don't know if she was just pressed for time or what. I felt it was rushed. This one, Winter, I just really, I probably need to reread both of these books. I'm not really sure what to think about this. Like, it's very strange. So that's what I read. Now let's talk about what I'm going to read, which again, I'm going to rush through. But I was really happy. I read 44 books this year, which I know that's nothing compared to some of you. But just to give you an idea, I did look through my book journal. The last time I read that many books was in 2013. I read 59 books. But like 2017, I read 22 books the whole year. So I've definitely been in a reading slump in general for a while. So I was really excited about 44. I feel really good about that for me, and I'm hoping to get to 50 in 2020. So we'll see. I'm not too tied to those kinds of things. Okay, so what will I be reading this first quarter? So I've already mentioned previously on my channel that I'm going to try to get through the 2 oldest books I own. Because remember, my TBR has to come from the books in this room, this library. So I'm going to be working on Raymond Carver's Where I'm Calling From and Gloria Steinem's Everyday, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. So I think I'm actually going to start working on these today. So we've already talked about that. And of course, one other thing I really had to factor in this first quarter is March of the Mammoths. I did not participate last year. I think I did 1 book for the Irish Readathon. No, it's pathetic. It was a great book. But I do want to participate this year, and I'm going to be reading David Copperfield with Joe Smith. So I'm super excited. We've read a Dickens book together. We read a couple of nonfiction things together, so it'll be really fun. It's going to be really great. So, and I know reading it with Joe will keep me going. But I've wanted to read this book for a long time, so we'll have to do like a before and after picture of the gold spine because they tend to kind of wear off. Again, I've also mentioned that in January I'm doing a buddy read with Jason and Mark Nash in The Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien. One of my kind of mini prompts to myself is to read all of the Tim O'Brien that we own. So after I finish this, I'll have 2 other books of his to read this year. In January, we'll be reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And in February, we'll be reading Joy in the Morning, which I have read. I've read this one twice, quite a long time ago. And this one I've read once, but again, ages ago. So I'm really looking forward to revisiting both of those books. And then the other 2 books, which we'll read in April and May, so that'll be second quarter. I also talked about reading more poetry. Some of you had very strong feelings about reading an analogy just a book of poetry. I realize you don't read it like a novel necessarily, but I got to start somewhere. And this is one of the few contemporary poets that I am familiar with. It's Every Ruined Thing by Christian Wyman. I read a Christian Wyman memoir called My Bright Abyss, which was such a great book. So I'm just gonna start with this one. Don't worry, I'm not gonna try to fly through it or anything like that, but I am going to try to read the whole thing. So this is a book that was on a TBR ages ago. I can't remember if Jason got this at a library book sale or a free library. I'm not sure. I've never read any Frederick Bachman before. I've heard a lot of people talking about A Man Called Ove on BookTube. I've heard a lot of people talking about this author, and I've heard really good things about this book. Winter is by no means over. So to give you some idea, it's supposed to start snowing at 1 p.m. today and finish snowing at 2 a.m. I think. It's not going to do that though. It's only 1 to 2 inches, so that's nothing. But anyway, so it's definitely still an appropriate time of the year to read this, and I hope to get through this in January, although I'm going to be so busy at work in January. I also am hoping to read, after I made my last video about just reading books from my own personal library, I realized I owned 3 books from this, let's see, it's a Bloomsbury Group special imprint. I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, there were 6 of these, and I own 3. This one's quite thin. Henrietta's War. It does take place, let's see, News from the Home Front, 1939 to 1942. So, I think that sounds really good. I also noticed in reviewing our library that we have a lot of 2-book authors. By which I mean we own 2 books by them. We've read one, or I've read one, and then the other one's just sitting there. So that's what prompted me to grab these 2. Again, I'm not sure if I'll get to them this quarter. I just really don't know what's going to happen because March is completely blocked out and January is completely crazy at work. But if not, we'll roll them over into the second quarter TBR. But everything is illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. Excuse me. I read his Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. There we go. So I've read that, and then we got this. We picked this up somewhere, and I haven't read it, so I thought I would maybe give this a shot. And I also have Muriel Barber's Gourmet Rhapsody. The book I read was The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which got a lot of buzz, and so they reprinted, I think, at least this other one of hers. And I read The Elegance of the Hedgehog on a trip to Paris, so that was very fun, but because I love Paris, my other city. Anyway, so Jason, I think, got this for me. It's a slim little thing, so I thought, again, I'd throw it in with the pile. Whew. It's a lot of books. Okay, guys, so that's my last quarter, and what is ahead? Remember to be kind to yourself, be kind to others, be kind to all those exhausted retail workers or people who were just really busy during the holidays, and take care, BookTube. I will be back very soon with another video. Thanks, bye.